You know, I really gotta say, cartoon theories, yeah, I was around when the first wave of cartoon theories came out, but I gotta say, there's nothing that can actually prove that a cartoon theory is real, and in my opinion, I find them entertaining, but I also find them bullshit. And to prove this, I'm essentially going to make up 10 fake cartoon theories. And just for the record, I don't believe what you're about to hear. I'm completely making these up. Some of these I could easily write as fan fiction, but without further ado, this is my list of the top 10 fake cartoon fan theories. And yes, I know that this is a remake of a video I did in the past. But, yeah, some of the entries on that list were already proven wrong, even though I don't believe them, and I came up with at least one new one, and I would like to list these theories as how probable they are to be true, even though they're fake and I don't believe them at all. I'm just making this up. So, without further ado, here is my top 10 list of fake cartoon theories. Okay, this first theory is essentially going to center around Johnny Test's mom, and it's kind of an expansion on the theory that she had an affair with Johnny Bravo, and that Johnny Test, her son, is also Johnny Bravo's son, and is not related to her husband. I'm going to expand on that theory and say yes, that happened. But in this fake theory, I'm just going to say she had an affair with Dexter years before her affair with Johnny Bravo, and that led to the birth of Susan and Mary Test. People love to point out the similarities between Johnny Test and Johnny Bravo. Whip crack sound effect, same name, similar hairstyle. Well, here are the similarities between Dexter and Susan and Mary. Both have orange-red hair. All three are geniuses. All three have to put up with an obnoxious brain-dead sibling. Yeah, so if people want to say that Johnny Test is the son of Johnny Bravo, I can just easily theorize that his older sisters, Susan and Mary, are actually the bastard daughters of Dexter from Dexter's Lab. And I couldn't see anything disproving this fake theory except for the fact that both Johnny Bravo and Dexter's Lab take place anywhere from the late 90s to the early 2000s, while Johnny Test takes place anywhere from the mid to late 2000s to the early 2010s. The fact that these are all kids shows, or the fact that Johnny Bravo and Dexter's Lab are owned by Cartoon Network, and I don't even know who owns the rights to Johnny Test by this point in 2021. And speaking of Dexter, he's going to be the basis of my next fake cartoon theory. And that is that Dexter will inevitably destroy Dee Dee's life. You're probably wondering where Dexter would be coming from and why he would suddenly get this desire to ruin his sister's life and essentially mess up everything for her to such an extent that she would consider marrying Mandark, assuming he doesn't accidentally end up dead in a final showdown with Dexter. Well, for one, she breaks into his laboratory at every opportunity, smashing things as she sees fit, and doesn't even feel the least bit sorry. She essentially ruined Professor Hawk's contest, making it so he changed it into a dance-off, and since he was the only one who danced, he kept his company, and Dexter lost his shot at greatness. A shot that Dee Dee stole from him in more ways than one, because if anyone watching remembered that episode, she stole the money he had for the floppy drive right out of his hand. In the episode Soul Brother, Dee Dee almost outed Dexter to their dad about his secret laboratory because he was fused onto her leg and wrecked her dance audition thanks to and he ended up like this because of an accident that she caused. And in the end of the episode The Way of the Dee Dee, when she breaks down crying and calls Dexter a mad destroyer for doing what she does on a regular basis, the show kind of established Dee Dee as a hypocrite. Now, I know the writers tried to play off Dee Dee's buffoonery as childhood innocence, but she kind of suffers from the major flaw of being 100% oblivious to everyone around her and how her actions will affect them directly or indirectly. And that's why, according to this fake cartoon theory, Dexter will eventually snap and set out to ruin any chance of Dee Dee becoming a Broadway dancer or successful in any way. And this is how he'll do it. First, Dexter will essentially goat his circus clown of a sister into revealing the secret of his lab. But he'll he'll basically set up a holographic barrier around the only way in that would actually simulate an actual wall being there. Over time, Dee Dee will essentially keep bringing it up to their parents. But as Dee Dee keeps trying to expose Dexter's lab with this new security system, i.e. the holographic barrier and or fake wall / simulated wall, or wall simulator, she will fail, and she'll keep it up every day. And yes, the parents will view it as this being in Dee Dee's imagination. But eventually, when Dee Dee's a teenager, it's gonna go from cute to annoying. And then, when she's around 18 or early 20s, they're gonna send her to a shrink. When Dee Dee fails to prove anything to the shrink, she's then going to be committed to an insane asylum. Dexter will have his revenge, he'll go on to be a successful adult, and he will eventually take Dee Dee in out of pity after she's finally released from the Laughing Academy, and they will live together as seen in the epilogue episode. The Wayside cartoon series is actually a prequel to the Wayside novels. Well, this is how the theory works. Todd basically went through everything he did in the show, and in the books it's mentioned that he gets in trouble and is sent home on the kindergarten bus a lot. He does this on purpose to avoid Maurecia, and basically escape the hell that is Wayside. He was put through a living nightmare, and actually is doing this to stay as far away from the place as humanly possible. And as for episodes like Mrs. Gorf, that could easily just be chalked up to both time travel shenanigans and character development. Perhaps driving Todd away actually caused Maurecia to realize what a little bitch she was. Harvey Beak's black magic theory. I mean, for a character that is so, cutesy and innocent up until, for a show where he's 9 in Season 1 and 10 in the last few seasons, it's kind of weird that he was able to go from someone who was practically the same person that Dade was, to practically being the leader of all of the kids in Little Bark. He is their leader to an extent, and it's very rare that if he wanted to do something, any of them would object. Well, in the episode The Amazing Harvey, when Dade sees Harvey doing cheap tricks and doesn't tell him how it's done, he freaks out and labels Harvey an evil wizard. Maybe he was right. I mean, like I said earlier, Harvey's personality is so innocent that his idea of rebellion is not closing a gate all the way, or returning library books late. I mean, yeah, he's kind of got the personality of a beta male, just like Dade. But, in theory, if he had black magic, he could easily get even the alphas among the kids of Little Bark to practically worship him. It's one of the only ways to explain him being so popular, something that, in the final episode, is revealed to have potentially been a thing for half a decade. I mean, why wasn't he upstaged by Rooter or T-Bear? Or, better yet, it would be hard to believe that even with bribing Fee and Foo with food, two wild children like them would never befriend someone who's almost exactly like Dade. If this theory is right, then Dade was right when he freaked out in the episode The Amazing Harvey, as Harvey's popularity came through evil magic, and he was secretly controlling the kids of Little Bark Grove the entire time, as an evil beta male wizard. I guess in the episode Little Bark, he put the voodoo dolls on autopilot and removed the magic from the one that was supposed to be him. Mighty Magisword's imagination theory. Okay, according to this theory, Vamber and Prohias are actually just two kids, and Mighty Magiswords is an in-universe video game that they play, and essentially all of their adventures are just them going through their daily lives, but we're seeing their daily lives from their point of view, through the filter of their imaginations. Witchy Simone is essentially their friend and classmate at school, who also plays Mighty Magiswords. Novell is also their friend, who has a crush on Vamber, and also reads Veronica Victorious, which is an in-universe series of books that Vamber incorporates into her and her brother's imaginary adventures. Morbidia and Gateau, also known as Witchway, are essentially internet trolls who also play Mighty Magiswords and just happen to go to the same school as Vamber and Prohias. Princess Zanji is a local teenager who babysits Vamber and Prohias and just plays along with their games. Penny Plasm is actually just a creepy neighbor girl who has a crush on Prohias. And Grupp is their dog. Essentially, all of the other characters on the show, outside of Vamber and Prohias' parents, are essentially characters from the in-universe game Mighty Magiswords that Vamber and Prohias essentially project onto reality using their imaginations as a filter. Episode Sibling Sorcery could easily be just written off as Witchy Simone being jealous of her little sister who gets better grades than her, but we see it the way it is in the episode because we're seeing it from Vamber and Prohias' point of view as the events are being filtered through their imaginations. Desiree could have defeated Dan Phantom, also known as Dark Danny. Okay, this one is going to require a bit of explaining, so allow me to do that. The events of The Ultimate Enemy are set 10 years in the future, meaning that even though Danny Phantom was turned evil by fusing with Vlad Plasmius, they somehow avoided the disasteroid, either by blowing it up or for some reason Dark Danny decided to unite the ghosts into making the Earth intangible, but somehow they got around it, leaving Dan Phantom, aka Dark Danny, as the larger threat. In the episode Memory Blank, we find out that Desiree's magic gets stronger and stronger with each wish she grants. And in that episode, she was powerful enough to erase Danny's origin from the timeline. So all the people of the alternate timeline would have needed to do is just ask for stuff for at least half a decade, and then either wish that the events that turned Danny Phantom evil never happened, or just to remove him from existence. Loudhouse Asylum Theory. According to this theory, the girls are actually adult women, and Lincoln is not their brother. He's actually their therapist. In episodes where Lincoln breaks the fourth wall, that's actually him calling them all in for group therapy. Lori was married, but her husband and daughter died tragically in a car accident, which traumatized her. After the accident, she lost her grip on reality and was committed. Bobby in the show is a manifestation of her husband, and Ronnie Ann is the manifestation of her daughter. Now, when it comes to the spin-off, the Casagrandes is just all in Lori's head, as she was unable to live without her family, and the only way that she could possibly live without her daughter was to become her, essentially creating a split personality in her mind where she was this projection of everything her daughter was. Despite not being insane, Lenny is there because, well, she's mentally handicapped and was duped into the whole delusion. Lynn was an athlete, but as her career began to go down the toilet, she resorted to, both steroids, and when that nearly got her thrown off the team, i.e. got her suspended, she then resorted to cheating. When she was kicked off the team permanently, she basically lost her mind. She held up a random convenience store and was then taken down by SWAT. Viewed as insane, she was because of the steroids she had been taking and never stopped, she was committed rather than thrown in prison. Lucy just suffers from depression. Lisa was a scientist until her experiments went into Dr. Frankenstein territory, and she was then committed as her experiments broke a whole ton of laws, and her practices were deemed unethical. But she didn't go far enough in her experiments to be viewed as anything more than criminally insane. Finally, Lana, Lola, and Lily are actually all just one woman who has multiple personality disorder. Lola ended up attacking Lana's boyfriend after she stayed there for the night and ended up switching personalities without realizing it, which led to her being committed. Clyde McBride is actually Lincoln's intern, which is why, through the show's point of view, he's Lincoln's best friend. And the parents are probably just their superiors at the mental hospital. The popular kids are either teenagers or at least 12 years old. Okay, I essentially put a stock image of Timmy next to a stock image of Chad. As the show has stated in its continuity, Timmy is 10 years old, and as you can clearly see, the top of Timmy's head, without the hair, comes up to Tad's chin. And with the hair, it only comes up to his nose. Comparing Tootie and Trixie's height, Tootie's head, minus the pigtails, basically only comes up to Trixie's chest. And with the addition of the pigtails as essentially added height, only comes up to her nose. And this theory does actually make a lot of sense when you take in the fact of continuity. Continuity says that Timmy Turner is 10 years old. And continuity also says that the popular kids are really rich. So their parents could actually afford for their offspring to be held back over and over again. I estimate anywhere from 2 to 4 years, because they could easily buy a company if they don't own one already and put their offspring in charge of it. They'd get safe jobs even if they don't ever even make it into high school. If they drop out in grade school, it might not even matter. Veronica both acts and sounds like a teenager, and she doesn't have an older sister who she's copying, so it would make more sense for her to be 13, 14 years old, given the fact that she even went so far as to develop her own cheerleader persona, even though Dimsdale Elementary doesn't really have any sports teams. Loud House is a prequel to Rick and Morty. Both Lincoln Loud and Rick Sanchez are characters who break the fourth wall, have sidekick-like friends, and have either an out-of-control or downright deranged family life. So anyways, here's how the timeline would play out. 1. The events of Loud House. 2. In his early 20s, Lincoln eventually gets fed up with dealing with the abuse his sisters give him on a daily basis and leaves. 3. Lincoln changes his name to Rick Sanchez to make sure that his sisters can never find him. 4. Alien things happen. 5. Rick/Lincoln is forced to go into space and leave his daughter Beth and unnamed wife behind on Earth. 6. He eventually returns to see that Beth is married and has 2 kids. And 7. The first episode of Rick and Morty happens. And as for Lincoln's friends, for all we know, what's left of them could have been incorporated into Squanchy and Bird Person. And if you really want to go for a stretch, maybe Stella became Unity. Trixie Tang was based off of Wendy Testaberger from South Park. Now, this theory was I got the idea for this theory from this drawing titled Black-Haired Pinkies that listed a bunch of similarities between the two characters. Long black hair, both being love interests for one of the main characters, and come on, when you look at them side by side, they almost look like alternate universe versions of the same girl. Maybe Butch Hartman saw an episode of South Park with Wendy in it and decided to base a character off of her. I mean, he did reference The Simpsons, after all, in Channel Chaser, which was originally intended to be the Fairly Odd Parents season finale, so you never know. It's possible. And there you go. The top 10 fake cartoon theories. I listed them in order of how likely they would be to be true. And if you like any of them, or all of them, please tell me in the comments section. But just for the record, I want to let you know that I pulled all of these out of my ass. I made them all up. I don't believe that any of them are true. But the thing is, I made this video to prove that you can draw parallels between anything. This is the end of the video. And if you like what you saw, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and as always, have a great day. I am a person who is no stranger to fan theories, and although some of them might seem like they could have some validity, even though we all know they don't, they are really fun and interesting to hear. But the truth is, there's no way that most of them could be accurate. In March of last year, I more or less remade my top 10 list of fake cartoon theories, more or less to prove the point that you can find parallels in anything and basically make a cartoon theory out of it, even though the original cartoon theories were nothing more than slander. And yeah, since my brain has, well, come up with some, well, ideas, let's put it that way, I'm going to be doing, well, I did another list, and in this video, you will be seeing my top 10 list of fake fan theories. The SCP Foundation will eventually overthrow all governments and replace them with a dictatorship ran by the O5 Council. And that's why the SCP Foundation exists. Why else would they keep a killer AI that wants to end humanity, a cursed Greek theater mask that drives the user crazy and corrupts it, a handbell that summons a genie butler who will carry out any task given to him, no matter how immoral or criminal, an evil pig god idol thing that has mind control powers, what essentially amounts to Pennywise from It, an entity that turns into any toy it comes in contact with, a cursed haunted kids show, a cursed slasher movie about a killer doll, the other slasher movie that's apparently cursed, where a babysitter gets hunted and killed, with the twist ending that the killer is secretly whoever's watching the tape, a box of old cartoons on VHS tapes that you could easily make the argument that the lost episode stories on the internet were on tapes that, came from this box. Who amounts to Godzilla? An evil clown that only little kids can see, who is constantly turning them into deranged killers, and that's not to mention all of the other SCPs they have locked up there who could easily destroy the world. Hell, there's even a hypothetical timeline where the SCP Foundation itself lost its humanity, became completely homicidal, and were sicking these things on humanity. I'm just gonna say it. The SCP Foundation is a front for a future dictatorship. Why else would they be gathering all these things and not destroying and or killing the ones they could, unless they eventually planned to sick them on us like attack dogs, unless every government on Earth were to surrender their power to the Foundation, and the common man was to essentially acknowledge the SCP Foundation as his new god. As in, it's only a matter of time until the Foundation declares that they run the world now. There are no governments. They run things. They control every aspect of your life and will have you killed in a really messed up way if you even show the slightest amount of resistance. Rey Palpatine is insane, and the entire Star Wars sequel trilogy is one big hallucination going on inside her mind. I'm just gonna call her Rey for simplicity's sake, but as a young girl, Rey came from a family of Star Wars fans. And when I say it, I mean they were a huge family. And, they were really into Star Wars. It is what their life revolved around. Now, I don't know how much Rey enjoyed the movies herself, but One night they went to see an actual premiere of one of the prequels, and when tragedy struck, her family died in a car accident, and she was the only survivor. The trauma this inflicted on her, because she was very little when this happened, actually drove her insane. She spent years in a mental institution. And in her madness, well, Star Wars was apparently the only thing she knew and was the only thing in her life. It's very unlikely that she had other friends, because at that point in time, Star Wars wasn't really for girls. So she created a reality where she could be unstoppable and do anything, because she feels she should have been able to stop that car crash. Which is why in the prequels, Rey is a complete Mary Sue who can do anything. Jason Voorhees has fourth wall awareness. Contrary to common misconception, Jason is not a zombie, nor is he immortal. The zombie Jason was actually Roy Burns, a lunatic who thought he was Jason Voorhees and was brought back from the dead by Tommy Elliott in Part 6 and by that psychic girl in Part 7. And when, this guy is the Slasher King. He seems completely indestructible. It makes no sense how this guy can just escape death time and time again. The answer is simple. He is the Slasher King. When it comes time for Halloween, his movies bring in a lot of money. So Paramount, New Line Cinema, and by that extent Warner Brothers, actually do have an incentive to keep him alive. So they actually have the crew wait until the cameras are off, right as Jason is on the verge of death, and they show up, they untie him, and they more or less put basically a dummy or a padded up stunt double in his place. The final girl attacks a protected stunt double or a dummy. She thinks she's killed Jason Voorhees. The end. A common misconception about Friday the 13th is whether or not Jason is alive. He is. He is not a zombie. This guy is not Jason Voorhees. He is Roy Burns, a lunatic who impersonated Jason in Friday the 13th Part 5, killed off at the end of the movie, only to be brought back as a zombie by Tommy Jarvis in Friday the 13th Part 6, choked by him and drowned in Crystal Lake at the end of the movie, only to be resurrected from the dead by that psychic girl in Friday the 13th Part 7. Psychic Girl brought Roy Burns back from the dead as a zombie in the events of Friday the 13th, Part 7. And when Part 8 rolled around and Roy Burns was gone for good, Jason returned because he knew his franchise needed him back and that Roy Burns was no longer needed. As for Freddy vs. Jason, Jason knew he was going to win the fight. Not because of the fact that, well, Freddy was scaring people and Jason was off, doing the research, collecting the documents, reading Nancy's diary, and figuring out how to kill Freddy. The actual reason he knew he was going to win is because of his fourth wall awareness. Or more or less the fact that the film Jason X came out 2 years prior. That movie was not a dream. Since he was the killer in that movie, he actually knew that Freddy stood no chance, because the events of Jason X were going to happen. Therefore, the plot of that movie could not have him killed. The Nightmare on Elm Street insanity theory. Nancy Prescott was your typical average teenage girl. But one night she threw a party and things got real wild to the point where the garage was completely burnt down. Her father was inside the garage and he was burnt to death as he couldn't escape. This caused Nancy so much grief and trauma that she went insane. Through guilt, she feels she needed to be punished. So she recreated her father as Freddy Krueger, someone who would seek vengeance for being burnt alive. Nancy survived facing Freddy, but like her father, all her friends died in that fire, which is why most of the time Freddy kills off all of the teenagers in Nancy's fantasies. Driven by guilt and trauma and grief, Nancy knew that it would only be a matter of time until she would face an end at Freddy's hands. So, subconsciously, she recreated herself as the final girl in each installment of the franchise. The fact that is obviously shown that the last official final girl was actually Freddy's daughter. As for Freddy himself, nearing Nancy's return to sanity, the reason why Freddy is killed by Jason Voorhees was because that when her father was alive, Nancy herself was a huge fan of the Friday the 13th films, which is actually an in-universe movie series. She needed someone worse than Freddy, the psychological manifestation of her father, mixed with her guilt, trauma, and grief over what happened at the party that night, to be destroyed by someone even more evil. Princess Leia was supposed to be seen as an idiot. Okay, it is more than obvious that when it comes to Star Wars, Princess Leia is 100% useless. In the first movie, she gets captured by Darth Vader and needs to be rescued by Luke and Han. In addition to that, and if she wasn't stupid enough to get captured, the Empire would have never found out where the Rebel base, the original Rebel base, was. As for Empire Strikes Back, she doesn't really do anything of relevance, but yeah, since it was her fault that the Empire found out where the first Rebel base was, and if she wasn't stupid enough to get captured, the Empire wouldn't have found out where the second base on planet Hoth was. Okay, and now it's time for me to get the elephant out of the room. Return of the Jedi. She gets captured by Jabba the Hutt and is made his personal slave girl, complete with metal bikini. It is the only thing she does throughout the entire movie. Yes, she does strangle Jabba, but that could have been done by any other character in the movie. Hell, you had Lando Calrissian undercover as one of Jabba's guards, and he actually had a weapon. Princess Leia, who is half naked, does not have a weapon. If anything, the chains were to keep her in place. And in all fairness, yeah, this comes off as dumb luck. If Luke Skywalker hadn't shown up to save her, she'd be stuck as Jabba's personal belly dancer for the rest of her life. I am not going to make any friends with what I'm about to say, but as of the 2010s, this attire has come under attack by Disney. Yeah, Disney does not like the idea of a princess being made into a slave girl. But in all fairness, that is 100% on George Lucas. And the thing is, he knew what he was doing. The truth is, Princess Leia is essentially just a damsel in distress in the first movie, as well as an idiot, and an idiot in the second movie, so this really shouldn't surprise you. He can make all of the feminist statements he wants because Disney is forcing him to, but that really doesn't change the fact that in Return of the Jedi, Leia was stupid enough to be captured by Jabba the Hutt and made into his personal slave girl, so that Luke Skywalker could rescue her. And if George Lucas didn't intend for this to be part of the trilogy, because this is the kind of thing that Disney would force him to use Death of the Author on, then he would have never put it in the original trilogy to begin with. And despite what Disney wants to accept, this is just as much a part of Star Wars as the space battles, the lightsabers, and the I am your father moment from The Empire Strikes Back. It has been subject to countless references, homages, and parodies. As for the sequel trilogy, she did nothing of use or importance that could have been done by anyone else. Tons of people on the internet have made it clear that they hate Jar Jar Binks, the character George Lucas added as comic relief. Well, the thing is, if you have a problem with this idiot, you probably might want to start developing a problem with this idiot, 'cause in a weird, below-the-threshold way, Princess Leia was the original comic relief of Star Wars. She herself was the original Jar Jar Binks. The Shrek Insanity Theory. Okay, here's how this works. Fiona is not a princess or an ogre. She was actually just a little girl who was not only a fan of the Disney princess lineup, she was obsessed with that whole goddamn franchise. But she was also mentally unstable due to various psychological conditions that she was born with. When King Harold and Queen Lillian locked her up in the Dragon's Keep, that was actually how her mind interpreted being committed to an insane asylum. Shrek is actually not her rescuer. He's actually her therapist. And the reason he rescues her in her delusions is because he actually managed to bring her back to reality. It took him a very long time, but it happened. Donkey and Puss in Boots are actually just Shrek's two interns. Donkey was hired to work full-time at the insane asylum first, which is why he's Shrek's sidekick. And Puss in Boots got a job as a therapist at another psychiatric ward for a while, which is how, well, Fiona's interpretation of that were the two Puss in Boots spin-off movies. And although we don't know if Fiona lives happily ever after, since the story of Shrek is actually just the ravings of a deranged madwoman who's obsessed with Disney, it could be possible if only because not marrying Fiona could actually cause her to relapse back into insanity or fall into a completely catatonic state. SCP-4304 is the secret key to proving the existence of the anime multiverse. What is the anime multiverse, you may ask? Well, I'm going to let ChatGPT explain that one for me.
The anime multiverse theory states that every reality eventually to become was exactly like an anime, with each reality outbeinged by variants of real people who actually exist by the one thing that is always certain throughout the multiverse, is that eventually each world will be molded into the image of a different anime.
Evidence for this theory falls under the assumption that the Rubber's interpretation is indeed the correct one. But since I couldn't find another, yeah. This is clearly the canonical version of SCP-4304, and I will be leaving a link to his channel and the video in the description. It was stated that the Blue Knight does not come from our reality. Just look at this mech. It looks like something straight out of Neon Genesis Evangelion. And when you take a good look at how both Blue Knight, the robot, and the woman who pilots it fights, you can see a lot of evidence that points to this thing and this woman being highly connected to the anime multiverse. It is clear that the Blue Knight is from the Neon Genesis Evangelion universe, but apparently from this display here, it could easily be theorized that the Blue Knight either was born in the Slayers universe, or that the Neon Genesis Evangelion universe is the Slayers universe within its far future, having become a hybrid of two different anime realities, possibly as the result of some kind of New 52 style cosmic reboot or remake. And given Agent Jo's backstory of how she claims to have idolized the Blue Knight as a child, but not anymore, after the incident that destroyed her home was due to a fight that the Blue Knight was in and or caused, implies that Agent Jo herself hails from the Neon Genesis Evangelion world from within the anime multiverse. Her mech, on the other hand, clearly seems to stem from the Overman King Gainer dimension, implying that she was hunting the Blue Knight at one point and had to make a pit stop there. Given the strength of the Blue Knight's mech, it's obvious that Agent Jo knew that she couldn't take her on without one of her own, to level the playing field. For reasons unknown, she could not get a giant robot in her own universe, so we can easily assume she made a pit stop in the Overman King Gainer dimension of the anime multiverse, and either acquired legally or hijacked one of their robots. It isn't exactly out of the picture to bring up the possibility that this woman does not come from our world. I mean, the Blue Knight here certainly doesn't. And then there's the fact that piloting the mecha in general puts a lot of strain on the Blue Knight's mind and body, which in itself is the kind of thing you'd expect to see in an anime, and a reality that's based off of an anime. And then there's Agent Jo's backstory. As a little girl, she idolized the Blue Knight until the tragic event that destroyed her hometown. Now, as an adult, she wants to be the one to bring the Blue Knight to justice. I could definitely see an anime character having that same exact backstory. And since we know the Blue Knight did not come from our reality, we also know the same applies to Agent Jo. And this brings us to the Blue Knight's contact, the Nobody. This guy is a criminal that no one knows anything about. Even if the Foundation knows something about him, it's next to nothing. This guy is like an evil version of L, or very similar to characters like Lupin the Third, or Leoch from Code Geass. With all that said and done, the only question that's left to ask is, what anime will our reality be molded into in the future? No one can truly be certain what fate has in store for our universe, nor could we possibly know the image of the anime that our reality will be molded into. But if I were to be honest with you, my guess is a 5-way tie between Dragon Ball, Yu Yu Hakusho, Naruto, Welcome to Demon School Iruma-kun, and Tokyo Majin. Ocean's 11 is actually a work of satire. It's essentially something that suffers from what I like to call Powerpuff Girl syndrome, where the franchise in general is supposed to be a parody, but when you look at how it was written, the people who did write it accidentally played it way too straight, and the joke went over people's heads. I mean, this came out in the 60s, and Ocean's 11 is about a bunch of criminals robbing a casino and constantly backstabbing each other. I guarantee you that unless it was meant to be seen as a parody, that something made in the 60s, a time when the Hays Code was in effect, it would have never gotten past the censors. The film tries to have a Robin Hood style premise to justify what these guys are doing, and when the Hays Code was established, Robin Hood was a very popular novel, but there weren't very many movies based off it when, Hollywood first sprung up, even though it's the kind of thing that it was so big back then, they'd be jumping at the prospect like crazy to make a film based off of Robin Hood, since it's in the public domain. The creator of Ocean's 11 knew that this would be a good movie. He just didn't see it as sequel good. The studio, on the other hand, they didn't get that part. They took the concept completely seriously, even though the joke was that you're rooting for the guys who would be the villains in any other movie. For crying out loud, they cast Frank Sinatra and his Rat Pack buddies as the main characters. That should be a complete indicator that this was meant to be a parody of crime films, in the same exact way that the Powerpuff Girls is a parody of superheroes, and therefore an un-American show. Naruto and Avatar are set in the same reality, but their stories take place during a post-apocalyptic future. Based on the Great Stone Faces of the Hokage, Naruto is set on the land that once was the United States of America, while given the architecture in the world of Avatar, Aang and his friends clearly live in what remains of Asia after the end of the world. The second Naruto movie did show us that the world is larger than the 5 great nations, and we eventually did see a lot more of that in Naruto Shippuden. And given that it was around Season 3 in Avatar that someone in the Earth Kingdom would try to rediscover flight, thinking that he invented it himself, means that there could be more than the 4 great nations out there, but the various benders and non-benders have not discovered them yet. And since the civilization where this land once stood was attacked by a terrorist group whose name started with the letter A, it could easily be assumed that the name Akatsuki could easily be a mispronunciation of the name Al-Qaeda. Since they are a terrorist organization and they would want to strike fear into the hearts as many people as they could, why not go so far as to take the name of the terrorists who attacked the nation that once stood on this land so badly that a war broke out because of it. And they would follow in their footsteps, essentially becoming the modern-day Al-Qaeda. ChatGPT also agrees.
Villages are scattered across what is now the United States. Evidence fans cite, tongue-in-cheek, includes the layout of some villages and the geography resembling certain U.S. regions. Modern references like traffic lights and certain technologies hinting at an advanced society that could have collapsed. Names like Land of Fire or Land of Water could be playful nods to U.S. states/regions.
You never know, maybe one day we'll actually get an epic crossover where these two iconic anime heroes will meet and team up. It's a long shot, but you never know. It might actually happen. Samurai Jack is a retelling of Batman. What I mean by this is the fact that Samurai Jack is actually a retelling of various Batman storylines, and that is actually going beyond the fact that these two characters both have a lot of things in common. Both spent their childhoods training to avenge their parents. Both have rich fathers who either have the exact same mantle that their sons wear, or one that is extremely similar to the mantle their sons wear. Both have loyal sidekicks who help them fight an array of colorful villains. Both have love interests who start out evil, but then eventually turn good after falling in love with the hero. Both Batman and Samurai Jack have fought evil counterparts or evil clones of themselves. Basically, they've both fought versions of themselves that were evil. Before Samurai Jack Season 5, we did get a non-canon comic book that ended with a hypothetical non-canon future where we see Jack and the Scotsman basically as the leaders of this massive resistance movement against Aku, which isn't really that far off from Batman Incorporated. Essentially, the superhero and his sidekick more or less having an army that they would lead into battle against an actual supervillain. As for Samurai Jack Season 5, you could easily see it as a cross between The Dark Knight Rises and Batman The Dark Knight Returns, both of which are about the main character, the superhero, not having been heard from for at least 5 years, and then springing back into action for one last time at the old rodeo. This is the season where Ashi made her debut, and you could easily compare her to the Nolanverse's version of Catwoman. The Scotsman's daughters were a massive help in the final fight against Aku, and you could kind of see them as analogs to Carrie Kelly from The Dark Knight Returns, who was technically the first female Robin, without having to have any indirect ties to Dick Grayson. Genndy here, who created Samurai Jack, is a massive comic book fan to boot, which is even more evidence for this theory, and in a weird way kind of proves it. And that was my top 10 list of fake fan theories. The sole reason I made this list was to prove the point that you can draw parallels to and between anything. And fan theories are kinda dumb, even if they are really interesting. And just for the record, I do have one more top 10 theory video in the works. I'm just gonna end this video with that. I'm not gonna tell you what medium it's going to cover, just that it's in the works. I, for one, am someone who is very familiar with theories about video games and computer games alike. Now, I've already done a top 10 fake cartoon theories list, as well as a top 10 fake fan theories list. So now it's time to more or less complete the trilogy to prove that you can draw parallels between computer games, video games, and anything in between. I'm going to be giving you my top 10 list of fake game theories. Online, video games have this reputation for being notorious. Video games are notorious for spawning toxic fandoms, so if you are a fan of Pokemon, The Legend of Zelda, and especially Sonic the Hedgehog, or are a video game addict in general, you might want to brace yourselves and or click off of this video, because this is my top 10 list of fake game theories. Mario and Link switched bodies at some point right before the fourth Legend of Zelda game began. Now, as you can see, the main character of this video game is fighting against Goombas, Piranha Plants, Thwomps, Boos, Bloopers, Bob-ombs, and Cheep Cheeps. All of these enemies come from Bowser's Kingdom. They're not random Zelda enemies, so what in the world are they doing all the way out here on an island in the middle of nowhere? Unless they were specifically hunting Mario at the request of their boss, I have no idea what they would be doing here. I mean, come on. There's even a level that looks like it's straight out of a Mario game, and Link just maneuvers through it, almost as if it were Mario in Link's body. So, I'm pretty sure I've proven my point. This guy here is Mario. At some point before the third Zelda sequel, Mario and Link switched bodies, which is why the fourth Zelda game is crawling with Bowser's minions. And every major character in the Pokemon video games was someone evil when they were alive in this world. And every major character in the Pokemon video games was someone evil when they were alive in this world. Al Capone was the most ruthless mobster of the 1920s. Bonnie and Clyde were also vicious outlaws from around that time period. It's only fitting that Al Capone would become the first champion, where Bonnie and Clyde would be reincarnated into the Gen 1 rival and the first Gen 1 female protagonists, doomed to a... Bonnie and Clyde were also vicious outlaws from around that time period. It's only fitting that Al Capone would become the first champion, where Bonnie and Clyde would be reincarnated into the Gen 1 rival and the first Gen 1 female protagonists, doomed to a nothing more than relics of a bygone era. Adolf Hitler was a genocidal fascist devil in life. In death, he remains a fascist, but instead of being able to take his own life, he's doomed to constantly be thwarted by a 10-year-old. Joseph Stalin was a dictator who rose to power on a lie of equality. The kind of way of life that would never work regardless of how you tried to alter it, and would still be unfair regardless of how you tried to make said way of life work. It's only fitting that a man who rose to power on a lie of equality would more or less fight for the equality of devils, who, might I add, if unchecked, could easily kill an actual human, but that's beside the point. The point is, he rose to power on the lie of equality. Now he can spend eternity fighting for the equality of devils. In life, Osama bin Laden was the man behind the terrorist act known as 9/11. In death, he became the malicious Lavender Town ghost. In life, he had brought down the Twin Towers, so it's only fitting that he spend all of eternity haunting an actual tower. And there you have it, the true identities of some of the most legendary Pokemon trainers in the history of the franchise. It truly is beyond ironic that tons of children all over the world dream of being Pokemon masters. And it's not just gullible children. There are teenagers and adults as well out there who would do some really messed up things, even for a chance to be a real Pokemon trainer, let alone a Pokemon master. The one thing that they just don't understand is what it takes to get there. So, after hearing this truth, let me ask you, do you still even want to try to become number one? SCP-5254, also known as Gotta Catch 'Em All, is actually the force behind creepypasta. In all fairness, the idea of, various Pokemon games glitching and going haywire, and more or less causing temporary to permanent insanity, not to mention sending the people who played those games on homicidal rampages, isn't exactly the kind of thing that would go over well. If anything, it's the type of thing that would get the people running Nintendo arrested, as it would make front page news, and every news network on the planet and or in the country of where this occurred would be covering this story before any others, because it's just so interesting seeing Pokemon's true face. Why do you think that creepypastas have been limited to the internet and the various wikis? Answer? Because the SCP are more or less censoring things behind the scenes. They're trying to find the guy who was responsible for SCP-5254, and since the Foundation has a way of doing things, i.e., that way being a need-to-know basis, they would feel the need to censor a phenomenon like this as much as possible, restricting it to the internet, and trying to say that these Pokemon horror stories are just horror stories, and that they're not real. Two games that actually are connected to creepypasta are Sonic.exe and Polybius, a killer arcade game long since thought to be an urban legend, until a copy of it was found in Portland, Oregon. Yes, I know there are people skeptical, but for all we know, the government could have easily reprogrammed the thing and removed the creepypasta-like programming, which made the game have so much in common with Lavender Town Syndrome. The SCP are the secret puppeteers behind the American government and every other government in general, and Polybius was created by the US government. SCP-5254 was converting actual kids into Pokemon. I really don't think it's that far of a stretch to say that he managed to get his hands on either Polybius's original programming or an original Pocket Monsters cartridge before Nintendo altered the programming to make the whole creepypasta Lavender Town Syndrome brainwashing and all of the subliminal messages that came with it less effective, and more or less started cranking out these hacked games, essentially brainwashing whoever plays them into becoming mass-murdering psychos. If anything, he might know who programmed the original killer copy of Sonic.exe. And if anything, this pretty much confirms it. SCP-5254, or addressing him by his code name, Gotta Catch 'Em All, is the one responsible for cursing the world with creepypasta. Nintendo will try to make Bowsette canon in some way, shape, or form. This one is kind of self-explanatory. We all know that Bowsette is a really popular character, so it really wouldn't be out of the realms of plausibility that Nintendo would try to make her canon, especially since they kinda did that already. Yep, there was a guidebook released for Super Mario Odyssey where we more or less saw an unused transformation for Princess Peach that really does resemble Bowsette. Now, it's more than obvious that Bowsette is a popular character. She really did break the internet when she made her big debut, and it really wouldn't be a smart business move for Nintendo not to try and make her canon. Especially since they almost did, in a way. Now, this can happen one of two ways. One, they'll introduce Bowsette as a transformation. It will either be a form that Princess Peach is transformed into unwillingly by Bowser, or it will be a power-up that she'll use to fight enemies in a future game where she would be playable. Or they will introduce Bowsette and make her essentially the rival to Princess Peach. And, you know, basically a Mario-Wario type rivalry. Either that, or they'll just have Bowsette as an evil version of Princess Peach. Maybe a clone created by Bowser? Maybe a long-lost twin sister who was mutated? Or maybe Nintendo will go the multiverse route and make Bowsette in a version of Princess Peach from an alternate universe where she was on Bowser's side instead of Mario's, and would have chosen Bowser over Mario. But I will address the elephant in the room. When Nintendo does this, they will rename the character, because they're not going to let the guy who created it essentially get his way by making his OC canon. My best guess is they will most likely rename her to Princess Koopa or Queen Bowser. The true continuity of any and all video games is what's presented on the classic box art. In other words, Mario actually dies in the first game, and every other sequel is just his dying dream. Kirby is actually white and wears gray shoes. And this is what Mega Man actually looks like. No anime style, no Mega Buster, just this. And if you're wondering how I came to this conclusion, well, simple. When Mega Man was officially put into Street Fighter X Tekken as a guest character, Capcom, well, used this design, making it kind of obvious that this is the one true Mega Man. Mario died, and all of the sequels were more or less his dying dream. And it's kind of obvious that Mega Man 2, as well as Mega Man 3, are really more or less in-universe movies and possibly anime, since Mega Man didn't look the way he does in-game, the way he does on the box, until Mega Man 3. If anything, this is more or less either an in-universe anime or in-universe cartoon, with this being an in-universe movie. Based on the exploits of the one true Mega Man, who only had one battle against Dr. Wily, who most likely was killed either fighting him or trying to escape from him. So yeah, the true continuity of any and all video game franchises are actually what's seen on the box art or cover art of the first installment in the franchise. Nintendo cartoons would have been saved if a Wario Land series was made. It's no big secret that in the late 90s, cartoons based off of video games weren't really the kind of thing that would turn a profit. But at the time, the Wario Land series was very popular. In fact, it was popular enough to get a remake on the Game Boy Color when Nintendo started essentially remaking Game Boy games for their upgraded console that actually rendered games in color. And I know what you're gonna say. Legend of Zelda 4 also got a remake on the Game Boy Color. But here's the thing. The last Zelda cartoon actually left a bad taste in the mouths of the already toxic Legend of Zelda fanbase. And at the time, the Donkey Kong Country cartoon was still running. And from what I hear on the internet, people don't exactly look back at it with fond memories. Not to mention, later that same year, The Legend of Zelda would fall from being second place to third place after the release of Pokemon. But Wario was popular enough not only to get the full-color remake treatment, but to get 2 sequels after that. One coming out in 2000 and another in 2001. There was a rumored Super Mario 64 cartoon in the works that would be done in the vein of Donkey Kong Country, but it's either just a rumor or something that was scrapped at least halfway or midway through production. So yeah, I can safely say that a Wario Land animated series for Saturday morning cartoons would have actually not only been a good idea, but it would have saved Nintendo cartoons before Illumination would revive the concept with the Super Mario Bros. Movie. Pokemon was originally supposed to be Moemon. That was the original concept for the franchise, but Nintendo got cold feet and turned it into just another monster battle game instead of something truly unique. because they were scared that, well, the Karens would get upset and start rioting and protesting like no tomorrow. And truth be told, this aspect of the franchise actually did make it into certain episodes of the Pokemon anime, as you can see here. The Pokemon anime is definitely an adaptation where Nintendo would know what's going on at all times, and there would be no way that they wouldn't, and or the studio working on it could put something in it that would come off as a surprise. Since it's made in the same country as Nintendo's the main branch of the company, this fusion of either girl or woman and Pokemon happens a lot more in the anime adaptation than one would believe. It's not just limited to a certain episode, several screenshots of which you're currently seeing on screen right now. The imagery of a girl who's half Pokemon appears a lot in the anime. Almost as if on purpose. I mean, when you look at Western TV and film, there are a lot of things that happen in it that were in the original concept or draft, but were altered or changed for the final cut. And these costumes that create the image of a woman or girl who's half Pokemon could easily be the remnants of the game's original concept. The original idea that Nintendo scrapped because they were afraid that the Karens would get offended by the concept, or in this case, the original premise for the game. I mean, just look on DeviantArt. The costumes that are appearing in the images from this one episode alone were iconic enough to be turned into several pieces of fan art, to the point where you could easily assume that Moemon is actually the original concept, but Nintendo truly did not have the guts to go through with it. And these Pokemon costumes were actually thrown in as nods to the original premise. My point is that the image and or concept is iconic. It's as iconic as Ash's hat, or his Pikachu, or Team Rocket's intro. And if it wasn't, I guarantee you, Nintendo actually would have complained, since, as established earlier, the Pokemon anime is produced in the same country as Nintendo's main headquarters. And I really don't think they would allow this to be in the anime if they didn't think it would be a successful and iconic staple of the franchise. Another good comparison would be the metal bikini from Star Wars. Like it or not, it is an icon of the franchise. It's as iconic to Star Wars as Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker, the lightsaber battles, the space battles, and even the I am your father moment from the climax of The Empire Strikes Back. George Lucas put this in the film because he knew it would be iconic and he knew it would be successful. He wouldn't have put it in the final movie of his first trilogy if he didn't think it would be successful. And he sure as hell wouldn't do it if he thought it could destroy the franchise. And I could easily see the original Moemon game from 2007 actually having been created by some guy who helped program the original, who in a weird way only did it because he wanted to see the original concept for what would be Nintendo's number 2 franchise fully realized and become something that would step out of Pokemon's shadow. As in something that would become way better than Pokemon could ever be. And if that was the case, he succeeded. So it should be obvious by now to everyone that Moemon was the original concept. The concept that was thrown out and replaced by disgusting monsters. The concept that had way more potential than Pokemon would ever have worldwide, and the actual concept that if they went with this would have kicked Mario off of the throne of being Nintendo's top-selling franchise. Chris is Frisk's twin brother. Well, I mean, just look at it. They look almost identical. And you're probably going to point out the fact that Chris is in high school while Frisk is a little kid. Well, I could easily explain that with two possibilities. One, either you don't age in the underground, or the underground has some kind of weird mechanic that causes you to age very slowly. Or number two, anywhere from a day to a week inside the internet is a decade in the outside world. And if that's the reason, then the next time Chris and Frisk see each other, Chris is going to be a grown man, while Frisk will still be a little kid. Sonic is the villain. Notice how there are no humans in any of the Sonic the Hedgehog games except for his arch enemy. Well, that's because that one scientist guy he fights is more or less the last human on Earth, fighting to avenge the species that Sonic drove to extinction in a destructive rampage. People claim that they have seen human beings in the main Sonic universe, but my argument to that is one installment in the first generation of Sonic games basically is a time travel story, and it makes all of this make sense. This scientist, the last human alive, failed to stop Sonic from wiping out humanity. And he basically fought fire with fire and created a robot Sonic to kill the original Blue Menace. And yes, I know that there's a theory that he captured Sonic and turned him into a robot, and this guy is basically the future version of the Blue Menace. But the theory works like this. The timeline is simple. 1. Sonic destroys humanity, leaving this guy as the last human on Earth, or in existence, fighting to avenge the species that Sonic drove to the brink of extinction. 2. Any and all Sonic games. And 3. The one where this character makes his first appearance is the end of the timeline, where he fights, he wins, the Blue Menace is destroyed, and this guy sadly remains as the last human on Earth. The appearance of any other humans in the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise is more or less due to a time warp and or time travel paradox. As in, these games are set at a point in the timeline before Sonic's campaign to end humanity began. But believe me, it will begin. And the Blue Menace will meet his end at the hands of his robot counterpart. Moemon is the sequel to Stranger Things. Now, this theory actually does work on a timeline. After defeating the Nazis in World War II, the Cold War officially began, and we scrambled to gather as many of the top scientists from the defeated Nazi Axis as humanly possible and put them to work on whatever we could to help us beat the Soviets. We developed projects around mind control and telekinesis, such as MK Ultra, and around 20 to 30 years later, the events of Stranger Things occur. And here's the actual thing that proves this theory true. Well, and 11 is the key. She, after the events of the show, goes on to become the Moemon version of Mew. As seen in this Robot Chicken sketch, 11's telekinetic abilities are obscenely strong, to the point where she's able to make things happen out of nowhere. So it is kind of obvious that she goes on to be the original Moemon. The government knew about 11, but they didn't stop. They saw her psychic abilities as an asset, and considering types, they thought, why stop at psychic types? And in secret, they continued genetically engineering Moemon, knowing that they would be the key to winning the Cold War. Because if you've seen the show, you'd be fully aware that Stranger Things takes place in the 1980s. As the American government continued to genetically engineer Moemon, eventually, they evolved said Moemon and sent them to Soviet Russia. And that event basically has only one logical end goal. The
United States of America having completely destroyed the Soviet Union.
And dominate them we did. With the aid of Moemon, we essentially dominated and tore apart the Soviet Union, stole their nukes, and forced them into a surrender. And here's the thing. Being the thing that won the Cold War made Moemon really popular. And with no war to fight, the Moemon League was eventually formed. Going on strong through the 1990s, with the events of the first game, taking place in the year 2007. The second occurring around probably 2009. Moemon Platinum being in probably 2012. Moemon Black and White occurring in the 2020s. And the various side games taking place at different points during the 2010s. So who knows? Maybe 11, or Mew as she's now known, one day went back to her old home to see her old friends and snack on some Eggos like she did in the good old days that happened 40 years ago. Now, do I believe any of this? The answer is no. But I specifically made this video for one of two reasons. One, to show how you can draw parallels between anything, and two, the fact that, game theories are kinda dumb, even though that's what makes them interesting. And what better way to show off both of those 2 points than to make a top 10 list of fake game theories.